Final Fantasy is by far my favorite gaming franchise and has been ever since I was a kid. I've been playing this franchise for a long, long time. In fact, I learned how to read by playing Final Fantasy way back in the day when I was 3 or 4 years old. And surprisingly enough, I've never done a ranking video over every game I've played in the franchise. Now, I play not just Final Fantasy, I play every game that looks interesting because I'm a variety gamer through and through. So today, I have 28 Final Fantasy games to talk about, and I also threw in a couple more to bring us to 31 here. A couple more that were Final Fantasy adjacent. Either they were almost Final Fantasy games, or the development team was so tied to Final Fantasy that they might as well be. And those games are going to be Chrono Trigger, Xenogears, and Vagrant Story. I have separate reasons for each one. Chrono Trigger, it was the developer side, were very similar to Final Fantasy at the time. Xenogears was almost Final Fantasy VII, and Vagrant Story takes place in Ivalice, which is a Final Fantasy world. I think these inclusions are fair, and well, I'm gonna do it. So hopefully you like those games. They're gonna show up in here at some point. It should go without saying that I'm not gonna prevent myself from talking about anything specific with these games. So if you don't want spoilers for anything Final Fantasy related or those 3 games I just mentioned, you will not want to watch this video. But before I forget, there's also 2 other games that I need to talk about because they're not gonna show up on here. So I haven't played every mainline Final Fantasy game, and the 2 I have not gotten to are Final Fantasy 3 and 11. Now, it's not for lack of interest. For a long time, it was lack of access. I've never had a way to play Final Fantasy 3 before the Pixel remasters came out, so I am going to be playing that one for next year. And also, I never had a PC that could run Final Fantasy 11, nor the money to actually pay to play it. So that is also one that I'm hoping that I can have played by next year, because I'd love to revisit this list for mainline titles once I've actually played all of them. I didn't want to do every mainline title until I've actually played them, because I don't know about all of you, but it kind of frustrates me when people call their video every mainline Final Fantasy game ranked, and then they start out the video saying, yeah, except for Final Fantasy 11. I didn't really play that one. I think if you're going to say every Final Fantasy game, either mainline or in general, you should have at least have played all 16, which is why I put in that provision I've played in the title. So I wanted to make sure I put that out there before we got into this. Well, we got a long one today, so let's go ahead and jump right in with number 31, what I believe to be the worst Final Fantasy game I've ever played, Mystic Quest. Now, Mystic Quest, honestly, I would give this to a 3-year-old. If I had a 3-year-old kid, I'd give them this game to play, because it is something that could be a great entry point into the franchise for somebody who's never played games before. That'd actually be really good for that. The reading is not too difficult. The gameplay is as simple as pretty much hitting X the whole time. That's pretty much the game in a nutshell. You walk forward, you hit X a bunch, and you read a little bit. It was designed to get Western gamers into JRPGs, and you can definitely tell that they were targeting a very young audience with it. It does not hold up to anyone who has ever played any turn-based game, regardless of what it is. And I very much don't like this game. I didn't like it back when I played it. It's very funny that back when I first played the game, I thought it was Final Fantasy 1. And I was like, what are people talking about NES games being so difficult? What are they talking about? Which obviously was wrong. That was not correct at all. But I had thought it was, because I mean, Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, it seems like it could be a subtitle for a game titled Final Fantasy. So I think it was reasonable that I was led to believe that, or that I thought that, without anyone telling me it. And I think that's what the developer's intention was. It's just not a great game. Number 30 is going to be Final Fantasy 13-3, Lightning Returns. This one is probably one of my least played ones on this entire list. I very much did not jive with the story right starting out. I don't really remember the gameplay because it's been 12 years since I played this title. I really just did not like it, and I dropped it pretty quickly and traded it in. I sold it. I don't have it anymore. I would be interested in trying this one again alongside the rest of the 13 series, as we'll talk about as we go through these. There were, differing reasons why certain ones are placed the way they are on my list, and I'll talk about those as we get to them. Number 29 for me is going to be Type 0. This is another one, I just really was not super into it. This type of story with like the battle school thing and the story, just the vibes that they were kind of going for, and the fact that it was a handheld game that I played on console. There's a lot of reasons why this one didn't stick for me. This one I really don't have an interest in going back to. I know some people really like this game, but I'm not one of them. I personally just really didn't enjoy it that much. Number 28 is going to be World of Final Fantasy. Honestly, this one, I don't hate this one that much. The thing that really stops me from enjoying it is that I'm not really a creature capture type person. I've never really liked Pokemon that much. The stacking mechanic in this game was very interesting, and I do want to try this game again as a result, but I am going to have to mute it and just read it because I cannot stand some of the voice acting in this. That was the thing that really got me to stop. It wasn't the gameplay, it wasn't the vibes, it was that voice acting for one of the main characters was so just really grated on my nerves, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had to stop playing it. It was really frustrating me. Number 27 is going to be Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Yeah, a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this one, just like they disagreed with me on my review of this title. That's okay. There's things about Rebirth I enjoy. I love the gameplay. I thought the progression systems were really well done. I love the way that you unlock new abilities and the way that all weapons are kind of viable into the late game. And there's a lot of build craft on display in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And for those reasons, I enjoy those aspects. The boss fights were some of my favorite things in the game. I loved the boss fights. I loved the way they handled the final boss of this particular game, the particular Genova in the City of the Ancients. I thought that was really nicely done and a great remix of that particular boss. But then there were loads of things I didn't like. I liked no side quests in this. I can't name a single side quest I enjoyed. I didn't like any of the open world stuff except the hunts, which were severely limited. I much preferred if they were just more of them out there, some super bosses for you to hit too. I enjoyed the summon fights. I thought they were really cool, but for the same reason that I like the boss fights. I don't like Chadley. I'm not a fan of Chadley. I think putting all the side content in the Chadley simulations was a big mistake for both this and Remake. We'll get to that one soon enough. And I'm just not invested in whatever he is. Like whatever that story is going to be, I'm not excited for it. I wanted to give Rebirth a chance because Remake I enjoyed more, obviously. It retroactively hurt my impression of Remake even more than it was already hurt, and I probably am not picking up the third one. The only reason that I'll pick up part 3 is if my community wants me to make a video on it, or to redeem the aspects of my 7 Rebirth review that were bad. There were certain elements of it that were wrong, and I would like to address those because it was a very early video in my career, so there are some things I got wrong. So those would be the only 2 ways that I would do part 3, but I'm not interested. And if it got canceled, I'd feel bad for the people who like this remake series and do want more, but for me personally, I won't care that much at all. Number 26 is going to be Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, Remake actually would have been a little bit higher for me if it weren't for Rebirth. I was hoping that the story would go back to something more classical, and if it did, then a lot of the things presented in Remake that I didn't like the whispers and stuff like that, I was like, okay, I can kind of forgive that as long as it doesn't destroy the whole story. But it kind of did. Remake would not have been super much higher, but maybe like a position or 2 higher without it. Same kind of things that I talked about with Rebirth. I liked the gameplay. I thought it was very nicely done. I liked the way they remixed certain scenes like the Honeybee Inn. That was a really nice remix. I thought that was geniusly done. And if the whole thing about remaking the story was expanding certain moments like that, this really would have been one of the best Final Fantasy games ever. But for me, story is very important in a Final Fantasy game, unless that title is billed as not story important. This is not billed that way. Final Fantasy VII has always had story as a very important part of the thing. So I expect any reimagining, any remake, anything tied to it to have that same focus. And while they definitely do, I'm not a fan of the direction they took. Number 25 is going to be Final Fantasy 13-2. This one is another one I want to try again. I think I was just in the wrong spot as a fan of the series at the time that this came out, and I was very much turned off by the way that it completely destroyed the ending of 13. 13's ending doesn't matter at all with this one. And in that way, it's a terrible sequel, but there was some really good gameplay on display. There were elements about where it was going that I was kind of intrigued to see how it turned out, and I would like to go back and try it out again. But yeah, it just had a terrible first impression. A lot of these lower ones on the list had terrible first impressions, like World of Final Fantasy, 13.3, Type 0. Very bad first impressions that very much harmed my overall impression of the title. Of all the ones on the lower part of this list, this is the one I definitely want to try out again the most. I, once again, don't like creature capture type stuff. I've never been a big fan of Pokemon, so that type of loop doesn't really do anything for me, but I'm interested to try it again and see if something has changed, because there were things about this title that I didn't necessarily hate, and the gameplay was one of those. I like the paradigm shifting loop of 13 games. It's a system I personally really enjoyed, as we'll see as we get to 13. Number 24 for me is going to be Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, not the remake of this. This is the original one. Out of all the ancillary Final Fantasy VII material, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, I think, is the only good one. It does things I don't like, but by and large, it makes up for it for adding some of the best scenes in Final Fantasy VII's mythos, such as that scene where Zack dies for Cloud and Cloud has to stand over his dead body. That part is fantastic and makes Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII worth playing on its own. I didn't really enjoy the gameplay though, and there were definitely things about this title I did not like. And I'm definitely in the Sakaguchi camp that these games don't need direct sequels. I like Final Fantasy as an anthology series, and I like stories that start and end right there, and I don't need anything else. Crisis Core is the least offensive of these particular type of things, even if there is a sequel that I like more for different reasons. In terms of being very plot relevant, it does do the best with that particular thing because of that scene and because of a few others. And Zack is a good character, but I'm not interested in playing this one again. And I would have much preferred if this was what the remake reimagining was going to be. Expanding moments like this out. Giving this some more of a focus in the story, because Zack Fair is a character that Sakaguchi didn't even know was in the game until he played a test build. Or maybe it wasn't Sakaguchi, but it was somebody on the dev team, and I might be misremembering that at this exact second in time. But because of the way that people designed different parts of it, Zack Fair was added to a scene, and other writers didn't know that until they played a test build. And so the fact that they took that part and expanded it out was really, really cool. And that's what they should have done with everything for the remake series instead of what they did. Number 23 for me is going to be Final Fantasy 16. So a couple weeks back, I had a video that came out titled What Modern Final Fantasy Should Be. And a lot of it was centered on what Final Fantasy 16 doesn't do right. And by and large, I think there's two things that Final Fantasy 16 doesn't do well. It doesn't do questing well at all. It does questing terribly. And it completely tanks the story in the second half. As soon as Ultima is introduced, the story is just a downward spiral from there. The themes are not good. Like, the theme is good, and it is tied to the theme that they established. However, they could have done it so much better if they just made it more Tactics in 12-like, where the Nethicite and the Lucavi are kind of the shadow puppets, right? And you do have to kind of fight them over the course of the game, but they're not espousing dialogue at you. They're not philosophizing at you. They're not completely destroying the world building by their very existence. If it weren't for those two things, Final Fantasy 16 may have been a little bit higher. It's tough because we're starting to get to the really good games. The only other thing that would have held it back is I do not like the way they paired stagger-based mechanics with character action mechanics. I personally didn't like that much. It really felt like you were just trying to get to the stagger break and then dump all your cooldowns. And that is definitely a very simplistic explanation of what the gameplay is, but by and large, there's not a real major skill ceiling. I would have much preferred if they leaned deeper into DMC type gameplay for this, and that they instead made it so that your damage scales up as you create cooler combos. That would have been a much cooler way of doing this. It would have been cool even if they didn't want to give you multiple weapons. They just wanted Clive to have a sword. For whatever he's priming, it would have been cool if he had different combos for that instead of the cooldown based stuff. So I think this is a massive missed opportunity, and as such it's kind of a poor JRPG, but then it's also kind of a poor character action game. It doesn't do either one of those marvelously well, and I would forgive that because I can forgive some amount of bad gameplay, or even bad isn't the wrong word. I wouldn't describe Final Fantasy 16 as having bad gameplay. As having gameplay I personally didn't care for as much, if the story's good and if the themes are good. But that part of 16 really fails, and that's the big reason that it's lower than my next two entries. Number 22 is going to be Final Fantasy 15. Now this one has similar problems to 16, but they're a little bit different. 15's biggest story problem is that it externalized a lot of the foundational knowledge of the story through the anime and the movie. Now, when you watch the anime and when you watch the movie, 15's story does get a little bit better, but it is by no means the best Final Fantasy story, even with that context. Now, beyond that, the vibes of 15 are actually really good. I like the bachelor party driving around the countryside thing. That's cool. I like the way hunts are handled in this game. I thought hunts were really nicely done. Summons are a very important part of Final Fantasy. Summons need to be done correctly for a Final Fantasy game to be really, really good. I think the big problem with 15 summons is that they are more or less just a cutscene that does insane damage. And the triggers for them are really rough. Like, some of the times the triggers make no sense for these things. And I would have much preferred if it was almost like an ultimate meter or something like that. Something that's more in the player's control, like a limit break that they can pop when they want to, so that you can save it for what you want or choose not to use it at all. I personally didn't mind them that much. I would have preferred if you got more of them, like if you beat the story and had NG Plus with Ifrit and Bahamut. I would have enjoyed that. I would have enjoyed if they were equipable, almost like GFs in Final Fantasy VIII, where you can equip them and unlock more things. The other thing that 15 did very poorly is the content rollout. I've actually never went back and played the character episodes for Gladiolus, Ignis, and Prompto. I've never went back to play them. I've actually wanted to, because I really do think it could change my impression of 15 a lot, but I never did. And this really just came out in an era where Square Enix was doing that with all their properties, and it really sucks. It's bad. It was just bad. And 15 deserves all the criticism in the world for how it was rolled out. And I think they took that criticism in stride, because 16 doesn't do that. 16, for all its faults, gives you a story start to finish in one game. 15, it gets you the end, it gets you a start, but there's a lot missing. So all that being said, I don't hate 15. I actually quite enjoy it. In fact, every game from 16 up on this list are games I truly, really enjoy. It's just that the parts of 15 that I don't enjoy are kind of big parts. I definitely want to play this game again. I'm going to be starting a review series for Final Fantasy next year that I may continue based on how those videos do. They will be taking literally hundreds of hours to make, so we'll see. They'll be coming out next year sometime. Number 21 is going to be Final Fantasy II. Now, oftentimes Final Fantasy II is the de facto bottom of the mainline rankings. And the big thing that people don't like with it is that the passcodes are stupid, and they are. I think they add a flavor to the story. They could have taken that system and did more with it and made it more interesting, which I don't hate it as much as other people do. The story is pretty limited, but I expect that when I play this game because it's coming right out of Final Fantasy 1, and compared to other NES games, the story is actually pretty good and pretty well done versus other NES games. I mean, it's not as good as the Phantasy Star games from the 80s, maybe. Maybe it's not as good as Dragon Quest. I'm not sure. I'm not a big Dragon Quest person, but I thought it was fine for an NES title. Now, the big thing that people complain about, or criticize, I guess criticize is the right word, is the gameplay and the way that it is an Elder Scrolls-esque system. So it's like Skyrim. When you use an ability, you level up the ability. However, unlike Skyrim, you can't level up your health or mana at level up. You have to do it by using them, right? Now, I think this actually makes a lot of sense, and it adds a lot of immersion into the title, because as you go through life, the only things that you improve are the things that you practice, right? You're only going to be a better reader if you read books. You're only going to be a better weightlifter if you lift weights. Like, there's no other way around it. So I actually do like that particular aspect of it, but it does lead to a situation where the game is very easy to break. You can become OP in a couple hours. That's all it takes. And I think a lot of people do this, and then the game is so balls easy that they just don't have a good time with the rest of the title. Every time I've played Final Fantasy II, I don't do this. I kind of pick a direction I want a character to go, and then I don't grind. I just play the game until I hit a wall, and then I grind a little bit to be able to get over the wall. I actually think that's the best way to play Final Fantasy II, and your impression of it will improve greatly by doing so, because I don't think this is a bad game. I think this is actually a pretty great game. It's just got design flaws that allow players to exploit the system. At the end of the day, I'm of the personal opinion that if you do that and it hurts your impression of a game, it's kind of your fault. You chose to exploit a system, and designers cannot plan for every eventuality. If I know an exploit exists in a game, typically speaking, I avoid it. There are exceptions like the Iron Dagger exploit in Skyrim, for instance. But I'm not playing Skyrim to have like a in-depth progression system anyway, so it's not really the same exact thing. But by and large, if somebody uses an exploit and it hurts their impression of the game, I've always considered that that's their fault. And that impacts my favorite game in the franchise too. Just so we're clear. So it's not just this game. It can negatively impact your impression of my favorite game in the franchise and my favorite game of all time, but we'll get to that one later. Number 20 is going to be Final Fantasy 1. Now, I think a lot of the time when people talk about Final Fantasy 1, they talk about how limited in scope it is, and it is, don't get me wrong. But I actually kind of like the vibes of Final Fantasy 1, and personally, I enjoy this game. I personally really like this game. And as such, it's legitimately one of my favorite NES titles ever made. It's one of my favorite 80s games ever made. I love it. I'm excited to replay this one specifically for my video next year and really talk about it. I'm going to do multiple playthroughs and test a lot of builds because there's actually some nice build variety and some replay value in Final Fantasy 1. I think back when it first came out, I think that replay value is actually one of the big things that made Final Fantasy a decent success starting out, because replay value mattered way more in the 80s and 90s, and Final Fantasy as a franchise, and one of the big things they've lost over time, is a focus on replayability. Final Fantasy 1 and 2 are very replayable titles and very fun for that reason. My number 19 pick is going to get a lot of people to hate me. It's going to get a lot of dislikes on this video. But once again, I've been a fan of this franchise for literally 27 years. So I feel confident to say that for me personally, Final Fantasy VI is number 19. This is quite often number 1 for a lot of people. And to be fair, I get it. Because 6 is a great game. I said this already, but every game that we're talking about from Final Fantasy 16 forward are games I genuinely like by and large. And starting with 2 forward, they're all on my top 100s of their respective decades. So Final Fantasy VI, I think, is a top 100 90s game for sure. There's 2 reasons why I think this one places lower for me than it does for a lot of people. One, I hate the late game grind when you have to grind up everybody to be able to fight Kefka. I played this in college for the first time, and that particular part, like, I set the game down for 3 months or 4 months or something like that because of that part, because I realized what I was going to have to do to split it up. Now, conceptually, I really like the idea of you needing to do that for your whole party, and on the Pixel Remaster with how you can speed up grinding a little bit, that might actually be better. I'll find out, and I might actually have to change my impression of this title for that video series that I'm planning for next year. Because when I replay this title multiple times, because I have to do multiple playthroughs for the video I have in mind, my opinion on this could be completely different. I also played the PS1 port, and I don't know how good that port is in terms of how it looks and how it plays and load times and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that could have done that. I also had played like 7 Final Fantasy games in a row, and this was the one that capped that. So there could have been a little bit of burnout going on there because I only played 6 once. I played many of the games we're about to talk about many times, but yeah, 6 is one of the last ones where I've only played through it 1 time. And there's a lot of those factors that definitely could have harmed my impression. There's other things though. There's loads of characters in Final Fantasy VI, but I would say I find very few of them compelling. I like Celise, I like Terra, I like Sabin and Edgar, and I find Locke pretty interesting too. But that's pretty much the end of it. I think Scion has some good moments, such as the Ghost Train bit and, you know, when his community is poisoned. These parts I think are very good and very well done. But by and large, it's like snapshots of that stuff is really good. There's other things. Like, I hated Ultros. Man, The first time I saw Ultros, I hated him. And I understood even back then that Ultros was not for me. I was a college student at the time, and Final Fantasy VI was not designed for college students. It was designed for kids, and Ultros, I think, would actually be quite enjoyable if I was younger. And I'm going to take that perspective going in, knowing that Ultros is there might actually make me be okay with it, and I might be left with a more positive impression of the game. I also think that sometimes your impression of a game changes when you 100% it and you do all the super bosses and stuff, which is something else I'm going to try and do with Final Fantasy VI this time around to maybe improve my enjoyment of a bit. I also want to experiment with buildcraft a little bit more than I did last time with the espers and try really hard to see if I can see where this is going. The fact that the pixel remasters let you speed up when the gameplay is getting a little bit lower, like I don't really like doing that when I'm playing games, but if it gets to the point where the grind is really starting to wear me down, because this is also going to be a lot of Final Fantasy all in a row, I'm going to do that just to make it sure that that part doesn't hurt my impression, because to be completely fair to all games can get repetitive and boring if you've done nothing but that all the time. There's a reason I'm a variety gamer. There's a reason that if I play a JRPG, I'm playing a boomer shooter the very next day. I need variety in my life, and I'm going to try to make sure I do that. And I learned that I need variety as a gamer because of Final Fantasy VI. And the fact that my impression of it was far lower than a lot of people, and may have been higher if I had some real variety in my gaming diet at the time. Number 18 for me is going to be Final Fantasy VIII. Now, this is kind of subject to the same thing Final Fantasy II that I talked about with Final Fantasy II. You can break the junction system very early. I intentionally never do that. I never do that because, once again, I think if you intentionally do an exploit that you know is there, it's different if you do it accidentally. But if you know the exploit is there and you go for it every time, and then you say the game is boring because you went for it every time, it's kind of a personal problem, honestly. And I find the boss fights specifically to be kind of enjoyable in this game when you don't do that. The big Final Fantasy VIII flaw, and I think there's two of them. One, the story is all over the place. I've come to terms with that. I don't hate this game because the story is all over the place, but it does mean that what they did with Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth is what they should have done with 8, because it actually would have made sense. Time travel is already a part of 8. Time compression is a part of 8. So if they wanted to do what they did with Remake and Rebirth and rewriting time and whatever the heck else that they're doing, it actually would have made sense as a sequel to 8. And that's why I wish they would have done that. And I'd be actually open if they did a remake in the style of Remake for 8, because it actually would work within the context of that game's story. And there are like very few games, very few stories in all of human history where that's true. And it is true in this particular case. The other thing I think is a serious flaw in Final Fantasy VIII is the way enemy scaling works when you level up. So leveling up actually makes the game more difficult for you in Final Fantasy VIII, which is not intuitive at all. Once you know that's a thing, you're incentivized to not do combat, which is dumb. I don't like that. When I play the game, I just go, and if I hit a random encounter, I force myself to do it, because that's how a game should be played. These are serious flaws. Serious flaws with Final Fantasy VIII. I still love the game. I still enjoy it quite a bit, but these are very much flaws that I recognize even as a fan. However, there are also things that some other people I could see enjoying, because on the other side of the coin, I like balanced experiences. I like to avoid exploits, but if you're somebody who loves to go on a power trip and be absolutely obnoxiously broken, Final Fantasy VIII is actually the game for you, because it is very easy to break this game, to just crack it down on the spine, like split its spine in half, because of how the junctioning system works. Something else I do like about Final Fantasy VIII, it's kind of a like a stupid explanation, but it's also kind of like makes sense actually a little bit, is how the junctions make people forget their memories. I actually kind of like that, and it's something that how gameplay informs the story is pretty cool actually, I think. And I wish all of the story in Final Fantasy VIII honed in on that kind of spirit, because it probably would have been better. Number 17, once again, gonna get me a lot of haters, is gonna be Chrono Trigger. So for a long time, Chrono Trigger, many people have called it the best game ever made. I wouldn't go that far. It's a wonderful game. It's a very good game, one I would love to replay again. And the big thing I think Chrono Trigger has going for it is the multiple endings. It gives you a lot of reasons to want to play the game again and again and again, and to loop through time and try to get a different ending. This is really cool. I really enjoy this. But I would be lying to say that I think the gameplay is more fun than a lot of the other games I'm talking about today. At its core root, I think Chrono Trigger is a wonderful game. And as such, Chrono Trigger actually is probably one of the best first playthrough games that I'm talking about on this list. But I think a lot of the other games, when you replay them over and over again, and there's more ways to experiment with gameplay and more buildcraft, they are actually better in that particular category. And for me, replay value is a massively important part of games. If I love a game, I want to be able to play it again and again and again and again. And I just don't feel that way with Chrono Trigger. After I've gotten a couple endings, I think I'm good, and I just roll credits and move on. But for a lot of other people, they like getting all the endings, they like exploring all the story ramifications of that, and I think that's cool for them. It's not what I'm personally interested in. I like for replay value to have buildcraft. Buildcraft is very important to me, and just fun bosses and super bosses to go for. Now, sometimes it's also just a nice story starting out is all I really need, which is why number 16 is going to be Final Fantasy IV. Now, Final Fantasy IV, in terms of the buildcraft stuff that I'm talking about, is part of the reason it's down here. It doesn't have a lot of buildcraft, but it does have a very nice story that's kind of like classical in its feel. Like, it feels like a Shakespearean play a lot of the times, which is what they were going for. It's what the developers wanted you to get out of it. And I think it succeeds in that particular way. It's silly, with a lot of great thematic values in it. And themes in Final Fantasy are intertwined. You need, for a Final Fantasy game to be really good, it's got to have good themes. There's obviously, that's not a monolith, nothing ever is, but by and large, that's my general rule. There is definitely going to be a game that breaks that as we go through here. Number 15 is going to be Xenogears. This is a game that has a nice implementation of almost like fighting game special moves into the gameplay, and I very much enjoy that as a fighting game fan. But then also, I really like the world. I love the story until that final disc. I know the story behind that. I'm not going to explain it here, but basically, he had to either end the story prematurely or rush it. And if he ended the story prematurely, he could hope that he broke the sales figures necessary for a sequel, which Xenogears did not do. It did not break those sales figures, so that's why it never got a sequel, and instead the Xeno series went off to be the Xeno Saga and Xenoblade series. I would love if Xenogears got a sequel, because I actually think the game is primed for it. And if they were to do that, what I would love them for them to do is actually just expand, if not a sequel, then a remake, and actually do that last act well, instead of it being the thing that it is. Now, I enjoyed Xenogears gameplay, so the dungeoning part of that I didn't necessarily hate, but even then, they're really long dungeons. What I think Xenogears does extremely well, and why it's number 15 here, is it has excellent themes, and Takahashi is super well read, and it is obvious. This is a philosophical masterpiece of a game, and it's worth playing for anyone who just wants to think about philosophy, I think. There's a lot on display here. I think for you to really appreciate Xenogears, you have a lot of reading you have to do, which I've never even done all of that reading. I've done some of it, and it's improved my impression a little bit, but I know my impression would be even better if I had actually done all of the heavy lifting, all of the wet work, and got everything else read. I think the characters on display here are very good. And while there are some weirdness with the story, weird aspects of the story, I think I prefer when things are in service to the theme more than if they just make sense on their own. And I think Xenogears really does its themes really well. That's the lit term, the figure of speech, the figurative language that they do extremely well with this game, and makes the game worth playing on its own, in my opinion. Number 14 is going to be the Final Fantasy IV 3D Remake. So I actually really like the way the 3D Remake looks, and it actually adds a lot to the game. By and large, Final Fantasy IV is as simple as its original version. Buildcraft is not there still, but the bells and whistles that they do add, like Proto-Babel and other things, I think are really cool. And yeah, it's just a little bit higher for me just because I think the 3D remake is a little bit better than the original. Number 13 is going to be Tactics Advance 2. This is one that may go up over time because I have not gotten all the way through Tactics Advance 2, but I love the job system of Final Fantasy. You're going to hear me talk about it a lot very, very soon. But the job system is really Final Fantasy's magnum opus. That's what Final Fantasy did that separated it from everything else and is where a lot of massive replayability comes from this franchise. So yeah, Tactics Advance 2, big fan. I could see it getting maybe into the number 10 or number 9 spot once I've finished it, but I gotta finish it first. Number 12 for me is Vagrant Story. This one is also another one that could go up because I have not finished Vagrant Story, and it should be pretty telling that this game, the previous one, and the next one land so high for me even though I haven't finished them, and I've finished some of the other games I've talked about many times, should tell you how much I like them. It's really just because 12, 13, and 11, numbers 12, 13, and 11 on this list, are games I have not started until my adult life, and Final Fantasy games are kind of long. So I haven't had the time to get through them, and I had to stop all 3 of those games because of this YouTube channel. And until I have a way to actually make a video on these games, I actually cannot justify the time to finish them because of how much time this channel takes from my life. You know, I got a full-time job. This channel is like a part-time job. I think I spend 30 to 35 to 40 hours a week on it a week. I haven't actually taken the time to check. And, you know, I'm counting video game playing in that. So, you know, some weeks it feels less than that than it actually is. When you take that into consideration, I don't have a lot of time to play a game that I can't record. And that's what Vagrant Story is. And I'm okay with that because once I can record this, I'm going to do a big video on it. I cannot wait to do a big video on it because I really would love to play this game multiple times and experiment with the different ways that you could build the characters and to fully experience the story. I'm very sold now. So this is a game that could go up over time if it has a very terrible third act, and it could shoot down as well. Please don't spoil it in the comments. I can't stop you. I'm defenseless. You could assault me with all the spoilers. Please don't. I hope you don't. Spare me, please, because I want to experience it for myself. I have never watched a retrospective on this series, this particular game, for a reason. I want to experience it for myself, and I would love to do like an Evilly series, all the tactics games, the Vagrant Story, and Final Fantasy 12 at some point on the channel. But I'm really holding out hope that they do a re-release on this. Either that GOG does on PC, or that we can get one. I have it on PS3, that's the only way that I have it, but I don't have any way of recording stuff on PS3 because they have a like video blocking system in their software. So you have to get like a splitter. I'm not going to get into this. I don't have the time to bother with that, which is the whole reason I haven't done it. It's also the reason I've never finished Breath of Fire 4, by the way, which is another game I want to finish. But yeah, Vagrant Story, it may go up. I love this game so far. I'd love to play more. The final one like this, where it may go up over time because I haven't finished it yet, is my number 11, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. So I think GBA games are kind of, unfortunately and criminally forgotten in the modern era. It's getting a little bit better because like Konami is starting to port their GBA games with Castlevania and their Yu-Gi-Oh titles. Nintendo's been doing really good work with this stuff as well. But with the Final Fantasy Tactics Remaster port, it's a port and a remaster, I guess is the best way to say it, coming out later this year. I'm really hoping that does well. I've already bought one copy. I'm buying a physical copy later when I can afford to do so because I really want to vote with my wallet and make sure that we get Advance and Advance 2 on modern hardware. There's no reason these games can't be on modern hardware, and I want them to be, and I'm holding out hope, just like Vagrant Story, that they do, and I would love to make videos on them when they do. But yeah, I liked Tactics Advance. One of the things I hear people criticize about this game, the judge system, I actually like. I like the judge system. I think it's something else to play around and experiment with, and I actually really enjoy it. But until I finish it, I don't want to talk about it to any more specific depth, just in case I'm wrong about something, because I play games guideless. I don't look up anything about a game until I've finished playing it. So I don't want to misrepresent anything about that game or the previous two until I've actually played them and looked into it a little bit more. Which is the big reason they're not in the number 10. Once again, I think they could actually enter into the top 10 once I've finished it. I have kind of a rule that a game cannot be on a top 10 list or a top 100 list until I have either done one of two things. I've either beaten it and rolled credits on it, or I've played it for 100 hours. Those are like my two hard, fast rules. I sometimes will make exceptions for games that I intend to play for 100 hours and I just don't have time to, like Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, which I reviewed just a couple weeks ago. But by and large, I have a hard, fast rule. It cannot be top 10 or any of these big prime spots if I have not finished it. And for my top 10 on this particular list, it's got to be something I played for a particularly long period of time, or I've played through multiple times. So number 10 for me is going to be Final Fantasy V. Now, the story it's okay. It's not as good as 4, it's not as good as 6, it's not as good as Chrono Trigger even. However, buildcraft in Final Fantasy V is insane. One of my favorite things about Final Fantasy V, and my favorite way to play the game these days, is to do job randomizers. So basically, for every crystal, you get a set of jobs. And what I do is I give each character a random job from each crystal. I do that just so that the first crystal isn't boring with everybody having the same job. And what I do is I write that down on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet or something, and I make it so that those characters cannot be any other job except the ones that they random. So at the end of the game, they have 4 jobs. Now that means that you have to play around and you have to figure out how to puzzle your way through some boss fights, because the game is designed for you to counter pick your bosses, to go in there, lose, or win because you have the counter pick, or because you're OP. You've grinded and you become OP. And then come back with the right job and beat them with their counter pick. I like this type of design. I suspect that it was partially inspired by Mega Man, but I have no evidence of that. I don't know if they've ever said anything like that, but I have the slinking suspicion that it is, because it is very similar in a lot of ways, counterpicking the boss with their weakness. So yeah, Final Fantasy V is highly replayable. I really, really love it for that reason. And I love doing permadeath challenge runs of the game. Number 9 for me is gonna be an interesting one, because I would guess that most Final Fantasy fans watching this video right now have not played this one, nor would they consider it a Final Fantasy game. I do. Well, I don't consider it a Final Fantasy game, I guess, because it is just an expansion to a different game, but it is so well done that I have to talk about it, and that is Final Fantasy's set in Magic the Gathering. I have played it for 100 hours since it came out last month, and I am building a cube. And if you're not a Magic person and you don't know what a cube is, a cube basically means I'm designing my own set using my own set of cards that everybody plays from when my friends get together, and I'm picking and choosing which ones I want to be in there. And we're going to do drafts, which basically just means you're opening booster packs, taking a card and passing it, and building a deck as you pass packs around. This is one of my favorite draft formats I've played. I've played a lot of draft formats in my life. It's not as good as Neon Dynasty. Neon Dynasty would be my number 1 favorite, but this would probably be my second favorite, honestly. There's a lot. Just like the franchise that it's inspired by, it does buildcraft very well. So my typical way of drafting is I draft 2-color pair, and then I have an underlying 3rd color that I splash for, because the splash cards in this particular set, Prisha's Wandering, Reach the Horizon, Blitzball, these things are really just good in any deck that can play them. They just work, and it means that you can splash for just 1 or 2 cards sometimes, and you're perfectly fine to do so as long as you got a Blitzball or 2. So I'm not going to spend forever talking about this particular entry here, because I did a review last Friday over this particular set. So if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts about this particular one, go ahead and just check out that video. I'll leave a link to it at the end of this one. Number 8 for me is Final Fantasy X-2. Final Fantasy X-2 has a lot of people who very much hate it. Some of you in my community I know are those people because you have mentioned not liking this game. And so that's why I hope you give me the time to explain this real quick. The thing that Final Fantasy X-2 does very poorly is that the story is not as good as 10. But the big reason that Final Fantasy X-2 is so high for me, and things like Remake and Rebirth weren't for what they did, is one, X-2 doesn't retroactively harm 10 in any way like Remake and Rebirth do. They retroactively harm 7 in a lot of ways because they're canonic sequels, so they definitely harm it a little bit. There's some things that X-2 does really well that I like. I like the way that it expands upon the Zanarkand-Bavel War more. In fact, the thing that X-2 does in the atmospheric storytelling department really well, and makes me happy that it exists, is that Spira gets more world building. You get to see Spira after Sin is gone, and that's kind of cool, and I think they did that part really, really well. There's a civil war brewing, which makes perfect sense to me. There's more context about, like, more people looking for the past, and you know what real world history thing happened where we did that? The American Revolution. We started looking up the Greek and the Roman philosophy for government because we wanted to see what people did in the past and try to make a better future that way. X-2, they do that. That's what the Sphere Hunters are doing. They're looking for the past to try and build a society in the absence of sin. Another thing that people criticize X-2 for is the characterization of Yuna. They feel like she's a completely different character in the sequel versus the other one. And to be honest, she is different because she changed. How do you go through the story of 10 and not change? Yeah, she changes. And I think that's okay, because I think her changes are believable. Now, all of these things would not be top 10 worthy. Like, even the things I do like. For everything I like about the world building and the way the world is done, and the things that I'm kind of, like, indifferent about, like the character designs. For all those things, there's always something in the story that I don't like. So for that reason, it wouldn't be that lands it here. And I said before that replay value and build craft is very important and is a very important part for a game getting here. And X-2 does that really well because I think the dress sphere system and how it works with the active ATB system, I don't really remember what it's called, but that's what I'm going to call it, where you can interrupt enemies, is a perfect middle ground for the action combat they were trying. Final Fantasy has always been going towards. Final Fantasy 16 is just the 15 and 16 are the realization, the ultimate realization of the goals of the creators from like 7 and all the way back in the day. They always wanted it to be more action. That's what they wanted Final Fantasy to be, even in the ages of antiquity. I think they did the best job here. I think they did a better job than they'd ever done at synthesizing turn-based and action feeling gameplay, because you can chain stun enemies. You have a lot of creative ability to craft your characters. I do the same sort of thing that I do with 5 with this game, where I will randomly select 3 jobs that each of the girls can have, and I do a different set of 3 jobs for each of them, and that's all they can level up and use throughout the game. I've played X-2 on a variety of different systems and hardware and stuff like that. I played this game a lot, for sure. By and large, it's the gameplay that does it, because the gameplay is really, really good, and the gameplay makes it a top 10 worthy game. And I also quite like some of the character moments that are in this title, and the way the atmospheric storytelling is enhanced for Spira specifically. So that's my defense. You may not agree with me. I think a lot of people wouldn't agree with me because X-2 is often reviled by a lot of people. Well, this is how you know it's my list, because I am not scared to be honest with you all. Number 7 for me is going to be Final Fantasy VII. Speaking of honesty, yeah, neither 6 nor 7 are my number 1 game on this list. Neither one of them are my favorite game of all time. Neither one of them are my favorite game of the 90s. And neither one of them are my favorite Final Fantasy game. A lot of people got into the franchise with 6 and 7 and another game that we're going to talk about here soon. And so it makes a lot of sense that there's a massive preference for 7. I like 7. I like replaying 7, and what I do is a materia limitation system. I'm not going to explain that today because I am working on a video for it that should come out next year. It's going to take me over 100 hours to make, maybe closer to 500, so I can't talk about it today, but it is coming. It's very similar to the FF9 challenge run that I posted on my channel last year, and there's some distinct differences. I actually made it following that video, but by and large, Final Fantasy VII is a great game. Wonderful character moments, great themes on display there, and I personally really like the gameplay. I think the gameplay is very fun. I think there's a lot of buildcraft on display with the way materia works. The big flaw with the gameplay that 7 has is that the characters don't matter. Like, the only thing that matters for each character is the limit break suite that they have, and the fact that you can't switch Cloud out. That's really it. That's really all that matters. So when I play the games, I also basically decide what I want a character's build to be before I go in, and then I don't let them deviate from that build. So I usually pick specific materia that they must have equipped for me to be able to use them, and that really has enhanced my replayability, like the replay value of 7, because it adds a lot of variety of, okay, now I want this character, okay, now I want that one. And something else I'll do is that I will random which party members I have to take into a dungeon, which enhances how much I like the system as well. Number 6 for me is going to be Final Fantasy 13. Now, this one I also am going to explain as well, because 13 is once again often reviled. You can tell that I've been a big fan of this series for a very, very long time, because I've liked most of the games that have come out, even the ones that other people don't like. I really like the paradigm mechanic. I'll be honest with you, I really, really enjoy the paradigm shifting mechanic. I think that's very fun. The big problem with 13 is it takes about 10 hours for it to start opening up. It takes me about 10 hours to get to Bartandalus. The first Bartandalus fight is when this really starts to open up and you really start getting more freedom in the gameplay. And you're still railroaded past that, to be sure. But I think a lot of people with that, like, oh, you have to play 20 hours before it gets good, they're talking about Grand Pulse. They're talking about your true freedom to do whatever you want and grind to your heart's content. I don't think you need to get there before this game gets good. But the first few hours are not that good. And I'll be the first to admit it as somebody who likes it. The first few hours are a lot of just press an X. That's all the game is. Press an X for the first couple hours. And it sucks. It sucks. If they remaster this, they need to have you have the ability to open up the system right from the beginning. The biggest design flaw of 13 is that they don't allow you to just play with the game mechanics from the very beginning. And some of this, I think, are the design trends of the 7th generation. This is what the 7th generation was. Slowing things down and babyifying and infantilizing game mechanics. And we saw a massive pushback against this stuff, partially because of From Software. From Software didn't hold your hand. It was massively popular. It showed companies that you don't need to baby players all the time. And Final Fantasy followed suit with the gaming trends of the time. And 13, unfortunately, was one of the worst offenders of this particular design trend. It's reprehensibly bad with this particular thing for the first 10 hours. I don't argue with people about this particular game and not wanting to try it out. I'm not going to tell you to try this particular one out, even though it's in my top 10. I think if you can accept that terrible opening and you go in and you're like, okay, Rayl Deal Games, he said, first 10 hours suck. If you can accept that and play it, by the end of the experience, especially if you're going for the super bosses and stuff like that, there's a lot to love about the gameplay of 13. And I don't think the story is as bad as people make it out to be. Is it as good as 7? No. Is it as good as the games I'm about to talk about? No. But it's not bad. And I actually think a lot of the characters are fine. Hope has gotten a lot of hate over the years for being whiny. And he is whiny starting out. But if you think of his situation, he just watched his mom die, and he's traveling with the person that killed his mother, from his perspective, right? And he's a teenager, he's a kid. Of course he's gonna be a little whiny. I've never considered this a bad part of his characterization, because he grows over time. He's a dynamic character. He gets better as time goes on, just like you want from a character. The other big character I think gets criticized is Vanille for her voice acting. I think this is fair, because the Japanese voice directors made the voice actress act the way that she does. And it doesn't sound good in English. It might sound fine in Japanese, I don't know. But it doesn't sound good in English. It sounds very forced, because it is. The actress who played Vanille is really good. You know how I know she's really good? Because she can make the sounds Vanille does. That's not a normal sound for an English speaker to make. So the fact that she's able to do it, and she's able to keep her performance up for that long means I really don't think she should have been criticized for her performance, because her performance was good. She's a good voice actress for being able to pull this off. As for the other characters, I like Saz. I like Fang. I like Vanille, by the way. I like Hope as well. So I like most of the cast. I was never a big Snow fan, and I was never a big Lightning fan, and they're big parts of the game. So I can understand somebody getting switched off for them. I think all of them go through great character development, but yeah, I've never really been a big fan of them, which is why my party, when I played, was always like Saz, Vanille, and like Fang or Hope whenever I played. This is one I really hope gets a remaster at some point, and I typically don't like it when games are changed, and I would be fine if they didn't change this as a result. But if there's one thing I want them to modify, is I want them to open up the gameplay from the very beginning. I don't want them to railroad you as hard from that side. I mean, they would have to completely redesign the game to not do that. And I don't think they wanted to do that starting out. It's just that a lot of hardware limitations at the time for the fidelity that they were going for meant that they could only do hallways the whole game, and that's what it is. It is a giant hallway until you get to Grand Pulse, and then after Grand Pulse there's another hallway area. Grand Pulse isn't that grandiose either, because it's basically just the Calm Lands except a little bit bigger. But, you know, obviously I like Final Fantasy X despite its linearity. I haven't gotten to it yet on the list. And I like 13 despite its linearity. I don't need every game to be open, and I'm fine with a linear game from time to time. I don't mind it, personally. I don't want every game to be that way, and another unfortunate part of 13 is that every game was super linear at the time. So when people were holding out hope that Final Fantasy as a franchise, which was more open to, traditionally speaking, wouldn't follow that trend, and they did, it was another thing that I think was bound to get destroyed in the initial reception of this title. And it makes sense. I like 13. I'd love to play it again. It's one that could drop, because this is kind of the point where I think those three games I talked about before, Tactics A2, and Vagrant Story, I think they could be right above 13. We'll see when I replay it. We'll also see when I replay the first 7 titles for my video lineup next year, and 11. I plan to play 11. Number 5 for me is Final Fantasy XII. I've talked about Buildcraft a lot. You guys know I love Buildcraft. The Zodiac Age fixed the Buildcraft in Final Fantasy XII and made it one of the best Buildcraft games in the entire franchise. Gambits give you a nice amount of control on what you want to do. I would have much preferred to be able to control my whole party, but it's good enough as it is. The big thing I don't like about Final Fantasy XII is how much the composition and breakdown of gameplay to story. There's a lot of massive gameplay because it was very much influenced by MMOs of the time, and it was basically trying to be a single-player MMO, and it feels like a single-player MMO in a lot of ways, but that means that the story is, like, there's hours, sometimes 10 hours between cutscenes, and it makes it hard to keep track of the story in your head, especially if you're splitting that over the course of multiple months. And it also makes it hard to really identify with the characterization of the characters. That's why I do recommend that if you play the game, you should at some point watch the cutscenes uninterrupted by gameplay, because it is a good story. I do like Final Fantasy XII story. I think Vayne is a great villain. Ash, Balthier, Bosch, Gabronth, Fran, these are all wonderful characters. Vaughn and Penelo don't get any better in my opinion, but that's 2 characters on a big cast, and when I play the game I don't use them. I don't use them because I don't like them. So I usually play, my party's usually Ash, Bosch, and Balthier. That's usually the party I go with. Number 4 for me is going to be Final Fantasy XIV. This game is by far one of, if not the most played Final Fantasy game of all time. This has definitely gotten more people into the franchise in the modern era than anything else. One of my favorite Let's Players, Cataclysm, I believe, I don't know this for certain because I'm basing this off of context clues after watching loads of their Let's Plays. I think they got into Final Fantasy out of Final Fantasy XIV. It was either that or Rebirth Remake, that series. So it was one of the 2 that got them into the franchise. Don't quote me on this because I do believe I'm misremembering this, because I've watched a lot of people play Final Fantasy X, a lot of Let's Players. It might have been one of the other ones that said that. I may be wrong, actually. But the point I'm making is that Final Fantasy XIV is a game that got a lot of people into it, and it's a lot of fun. It's one of my most played games of all time. I'm going to be making a video about my most played games of all time later on this year, and this is absolutely one of them, and it's really high up on that list. I played it for 444 hours, and I never finished Heavensward because I was leveling up all the jobs because I found the gameplay to be that fun. I found the boss design to be that fun, and it was at a period of time where my brother and I and my friend Justin, we got on every single night and played 5 hours of Final Fantasy XIV literally every single day for 3 months straight. It was in my student teaching. It's the way I relaxed after student teaching, which was a very stressful period of my life, and I very much enjoyed 14 for that reason. I've not played it since 2017. I would love to play it again. I would love to actually experience the story because this was a multiplayer title and I was treating it like a place for my brother and I to be together without actually being in the same space. I didn't actually pay attention to the story, so that's something I want to rectify at some point in the future, even if my brother, who has told me this, would really never play this game again just because he doesn't have that kind of time anymore. Number 3 for me is going to be Final Fantasy IX. I made a video on the channel for Final Fantasy IX last year about a challenge run I did, a roguelike permadeath challenge run for the game. And yeah, I love this game. I love the gameplay of this. I have to do ability limiters whenever I play the game now to make it interesting and to force myself to kind of think my way through harder situations that are present in the game, unless I'm going for 100%, because Ozma's hard enough on his own. You don't need to make Ozma harder than he is. But yeah, Final Fantasy IX has been one of my favorite Final Fantasy games for a long time. In fact, my top 3 here has not changed. Well, okay, that's not true. It has shifted over time as I played more and more games, but as time has happened and as I played the games more and more and more, my top 3 has been the top 3 the way it has been for a long time. My number 3 and number 2 have switched spaces sometimes, so sometimes 9 has been my second favorite game and sometimes it's been my third favorite. It's been my third favorite for long enough that I think this is a very stable place for it to be. I would love to see if that Final Fantasy IX Remake comes out, whether it drops this one entirely, whether it is not good and goes really, really low, or if it's just one step above it. I have no idea. I hope that Final Fantasy IX Remake, if they're still working on it, is good though. Vivi is one of my favorite characters in gaming. I love Vivi as a character. Final Fantasy IX is just a beautiful game, and I love pretty much everything about it. I have some qualms with how rushed the story is in disc 3 and 4, but that's kind of something that Final Fantasy was in the PS1 era. It always gets rushed towards the end, and that has to do with development, I think. There's plenty of areas in this game where if they remade it, they could expand certain story beats out and make them even better. So I love this game. This has been a really long video though, so let's go ahead and move on here to number 2. Final Fantasy X. I love me some Final Fantasy X. I actually beat Final Fantasy X after X-2, which might have impacted my impression of X-2 quite a bit, because I knew where things were going. So as I was playing X, I was looking for evidence of, oh yeah, this is how this character could become this character in the future, you know? X is my pick for the best video game story ever told. It's in my top 10 best stories ever told. I love Final Fantasy X as a Bilston Roman, because that's kind of what it is, but then it also has great thematic value to it and shaped a lot of my world philosophy as I grew up in life. I have to preface with that kind of information because Final Fantasy X is pretty light on buildcraft, which is something that I very much prize in Final Fantasy games. But this is one of the cases where the story and characters are so good that I just forgive it. Yuna is my favorite video game character of all time. I love Yuna. I can't think of even one character in Final Fantasy X I don't like. I even like Owaka. So yeah, Final Fantasy X is going to be my second favorite game in the franchise. And then my number 1 is not only my number 1 favorite Final Fantasy game, it's my number 1 game of the 90s. It's my number 1 game of all time. And that's Final Fantasy Tactics, which is finally becoming available on modern hardware once again. I've already pre-ordered this game, but I will be buying a physical copy of this game in addition. My favorite way to play this game is to randomize 6 jobs, and that's the pool of jobs that I'm allowed to have. Ramza can do all 6 of them, but anytime I get a new character, and I cannot use unique characters outside of story situations. That's a personal rule. I always let them go on these playthroughs. from here on out, as soon as you're allowed to. But any other person I get on my team is only allowed to have 3 of those 6 jobs. So it's a lot to keep track of, and I have to have a spreadsheet of this stuff because I also play the game in Iron Man, so if I game over, it's over, I just restart. Or if a character dies, they're gone. I play this very much like it's XCOM in a lot of ways. I've played this game more than any other Final Fantasy game except 14. And I may have played Tactics more than 14, but because a lot of that was on PS1 and the PS3 version and on a PS2 memory card, like PS1 memory card, PS2 memory card, PS3 thing, and I don't have any of these saves anymore, it's very hard for me to know. I do know that one of my playthroughs was 99 hours. And something you need to know about Tactics is that the game does not count above 99.59 hours. So 99 hours and 59 minutes, it stops counting. You're in the red and you don't go higher than that. So I know I played that game for more than 100 hours on one of my like 30 saves. So I know it's very possible that this is my most played game of all time, actually, but I have no way to prove that, no way to know that for certain, so I will say it's my second most played Final Fantasy game until I can actually prove that with my data from the PS5 release, and I imagine every other release that it's going to happen, because I'm going to get it on everything that it can. I am not going another 20 years of my life without an easy an effective and simple way of playing Tactics. It's my favorite game of all time, and I have loads of videos coming out this year about Tactics that I will be making, because I am going to 100% the enhanced mode on the remake, the remastered mode, the classic mode, which is kind of a combination port of War of the Lions and the original, or at least that's the way they're billing it, and the PS1 game. I'm going to do 100% on all 3 of them, which is going to be a lot of time, and big reason I can't do my other Final Fantasy videos this year because of that, because they're going to burn a lot of my time. I love this game to pieces, and I would have to talk for another 3 hours to fully explain what I love about it. What I am going to say right now is I referenced with Final Fantasy 2 and a couple other entries that I don't hold it against a game if there's a broken system and an exploit that allows you to break the game and make it balls easy. Tactics is one of those. Orlando is broken. Calculator job is broken. Unless I random that in my set of 6, I don't use it. I just don't use it. And I actually think limiting yourself in Tactics is better. Solo Ramza runs are very hard, but they can be very satisfying. Solo Ramza runs with a random job are even more difficult, but they also have their own sort of satisfaction to them, in my opinion. I like Tactics quite a bit, and I am very, very hyped to play more of it. Well, guys, this was a very long video, but that is my ranking of every Final Fantasy game I've played. I will be doing a list like this next year for every mainline game, so Tactics won't be on there, and I'm going to be replaying 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, 7, and I'll be playing 3 and 11 for the first time for that video. So if you actually want to watch a mainline Final Fantasy games ranked video that actually includes all the mainline games in it without some kind of I don't play Final Fantasy 11 thing at the beginning, then you'll want to stay tuned for next year. You'll probably bounce into me again even if you don't subscribe and you like this type of stuff in general. So you'll probably see that around anyway. But if you don't want to miss it, you're going to have to subscribe, ring the notification bell, and like the video. I'd love to talk about your list for Final Fantasy. We can discuss everything Final Fantasy in the comments below. If you have a moment right now, maybe check out that Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering video I mentioned. I'll leave a link to it at the end of this video. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you guys for watching the video. I very much, truly appreciate your time. This was not a short video, so thank you for getting this far into it, my friend. I hope you have an awesome day.